people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, certified Christian counselor and director of Ottawa's Elam Counselling Services.
Hi, I'm Melissa Waggett, co-host of Life Transformations, a Christian counseling radio show where chains are broken and lives are transformed. I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this edition of our show. And with me in studio, as always, is Michael Hart, the director of Elam Counselling Service, a Christian counseling ministry here in Ottawa. If this is your first time joining us and you're not familiar with Elam Counseling Ministries and this show, you can learn more about us at www.elamcounselingministry.com, counseling with 2 L's. Elam is a service that provides professional counseling from a Christian perspective for individuals, couples, and families at subsidized rates due to generous donations. If you would like to get in touch with us by phone, our phone number is 699-1677. And as I said off the top, with me in studio is Michael Hart, the director of Elam Counseling Ministries. And we have a show today all about overcoming betrayal. So thank you, Michael, for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for agreeing to be here and for that wonderful introduction that you have given to the show. I'd also like to remind listeners that we do have a Facebook page and a Twitter page, so you can interact with us through those pages as well. And as Melissa said, today we're talking about overcoming betrayal. And one of the most famous last words in history is as a result of a betrayal. Those are the last words of Julius Caesar. According to Shakespeare, as Julius Caesar was being killed by his best friend, Marcus Junius Brutus, his last words were, "You too, Brutus?" So he was been killed by this group of senators who had turned against him and assassinated him. And even in the midst of his pain, his shock was towards his friend Brutus when he saw Brutus with the dagger. And his last words were, "You too, Brutus." So that shock overcame the pain that he was feeling at the time, because he just couldn't understand how his friend Brutus would be part of those conspirators who had plotted his death. And we also see an example of betrayal in Psalm 51. We have David speaking of his pain and his agony as a result of the betrayal. And I'll just read a bit of Psalm 51 in starting this show. First, to speak of David's pain, where David in Psalm 51 wrote, "My heart is in anguish within me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me. I said, oh, that I had the wings of a dove, I would fly away and be at rest." And then David goes on to say something very profound. He said, "If an enemy were insulting me, I could endure it. If a foe were raising himself against me, I could hide from him. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship as we walked with the crowd at the house of God."
Oh, that just hits you in the gut.
Absolutely.
And you can really hear the emotion in both the story of Caesar and in David's experience there, that when someone you love and care about, or someone that's close to you, betrays you, how deep that can cut and how emotionally affecting it can be. So in your clinical practice and your counseling practice that you do, Michael, what kind of betrayal have you seen?
Betrayal takes a number of different forms, and because I deal with a lot of Christians, some of the betrayal that I see revolve around people who are in ministry, who have felt betrayed by a partner who abandoned them in the middle of a big project, for example. There are people who felt that they were together they heard from God, and that they were doing God's work together. And just as they embark on a ministry, one partner decides this is not for me anymore, then the other partner is left there feeling betrayed and feeling as if they have been abandoned. I also see trusting spouses who discover that their partner has been having an affair, or in some cases multiple affairs. Another common form of betrayal that I see is people whose business partner have used legal maneuvers to usurp sole ownership of a successful business. So these are people who have started a business from scratch, for example, and they now have a multi-million-dollar business, and then suddenly one partner discovered that the books of the business or the agreement, the documents of the business have been doctored in such a way that they are no longer co-owner, that they have now been forced out of the business. We also see betrayal felt by children, for example, who feel abandoned by parents who have kicked them out of the house or have treated them unfairly in favor of a new partner or a step parent. I see pastors who feel betrayed because they feel as if the board of their church have contrived to get rid of them after they have dedicated years of hard work to the service. And last but not least, I see people who feel that God has abandoned them, who feel that God has betrayed them because they have read promises in the Bible that they have adhered to and have tried to live their lives based on those principles, and they feel that God doesn't seem to be there for them any longer.
I think that's a really interesting point, last point you brought up there, because sometimes I don't think we think of the betrayal by God, but when our spirituality, as we know, is so important to us.
Yes.
That if you were to feel betrayed by God, I think of even Jesus on the cross saying, "God, why have you forsaken me?" Like how visceral that feeling would be.
Absolutely.
And so when you've had people in your practice or with the research you've done regarding betrayal, in what ways do people react when these type of circumstances happen to them?
One of the very common ways to respond to betrayal is to respond in anger. A lot of times the people, take for example some of these examples I've given before, the pastor who feel the board has kicked them out unfairly, or the business partner who has been tricked out of ownership of the business, or the person who is abandoned in the middle of a ministry. Anger is sometimes a very, 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 very natural way in which people react to that. I am angry about what has been done to me, angry about what has been done to me. I also see that when people become depressed and they withdraw as a result of how they feel. Another outcome of betrayal can be paranoia. People who have betrayed sometimes develop a tendency to not trust anyone anymore and to feel as if everyone out there is about to get me. Mm-hmm. And everything that is done to me has a deeper meaning, a sinister plot behind it. There's also sometimes out of that comes the inability to trust ever again. One of the sad outcomes of betrayal is that people sometimes give up on their faith. We talk about people who have become angry at God because they can't seem to be healed. I see very sad situations where people have been diagnosed with incurable cancer, for example, and they're given a short time to live, and they have been praying for years for God healing, and now they're standing at death's door and feeling, where is God? Mm-hmm. Why isn't God acting on my behalf? And the tendency sometimes is for these people to give up on their faith because they're feeling that God just isn't there. And it's very, 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 very sad to see some of these situations that develop.
So what types of responses to betrayal are destructive?
When people becomes angry can be a good thing in itself, because you should be angry over when an injustice is done. God, we did a show on anger, and the Bible talks about God as being angry. So anger in itself, it's not a bad thing. Anger sometimes say an injustice has been done and I want to have justice. So anger in itself is not wrong. It is how you go about getting that justice, or how you deal with the anger that makes it wrong. So when betrayal happens, they should be hurt. So anger is okay, but when it comes to revenge, people seeking revenge or people seeking to do back what has been done to them, it can create a cycle of bitterness and hurt that can sometimes go on for generations. We see some of the conflict in parts of the world where it just keeps getting out of control because their people are so angry that they can't forgive, and it keeps going from generation to generation. But let me say that I see also another kind of detrimental approach to betrayal, where Christians are sometimes advised that they should just forgive and move on. And what they end up doing is just sweeping everything under the carpet and saying, now we're okay, let us continue.
Yeah, it's that forgive and forget. And so why is that an issue? Why can't we just sweep it under the rug and move on? Why is it so bad?
Well, I think if you use the example of a spouse who has been unfaithful multiple times, and this spouse maybe had moved out of the house, had lived with someone else for a while, and suddenly comes back home one day, and the other spouse says, you know what, I'm going to forgive and I'm going to move on. Let's just start a new leaf. So if you just take this person back in, forget about everything that was done, forget about the cheating, and just say, okay, let us now start our life over again.
Blank slate.
Yeah, blank slate. It seems very like a good thing to do on the surface, but what usually happens in these situations is that the same factors that led the person to cheat in the first place will resurface after a time. So what we sometimes see in this situation where people are starting a blank slate is that they make themselves into doormats, because they develop this revolving door where the partner who has cheated will go out, come back in, go out again, come back in, cheat again, because the factors that caused them to cheat in the first place has not been dealt with. They have not dealt with the root of whatever it is that is causing them to go outside of the relationship. They are not working on things in their relationship that needs to be worked on. So I think sometimes after a period of where a person has been unfaithful and it has been discovered, it's not a good thing to say, let's just start over without getting help to find out why it happened in the first place, what resulted in this, and what is at the root of this kind of behavior, because you run the risk of having this done over and over and over again.
So is there a principle in the Bible we could look to that would give an example of that we could see how you don't sweep it under the rug, or if you do, how detrimental it can be?
Absolutely. I think if we look at Matthew 18, we have two teachings there about forgiveness that seems to be opposite to each other. But I think they both go hand in hand, and I'll explain why they go hand in hand in a while after I've identified them. So one of the teachings says that we are to forgive 70 times 7. And Christians love that verse, right? Because they're quick to point out, oh yes, I just need to forgive, right?
Yeah.
But then there's the other teaching where Jesus goes at length to explain how we should treat a brother if the brother is unrepentant. So in other words, if you're in a relationship with someone and they have done some wrong, Jesus say, go to that person and talk to them about what they have done wrong. In other words, Jesus is saying, don't sweep it under the carpet. Even though I want you to forgive, I am not calling on you to say, okay, this is just vanished into thin air and now we can move on. Go to the brother, show the brother his or show the sister her fault. And then the other thing that you need to do if the brother fails or the sister fails to acknowledge the fault is to bring witnesses and talk to this brother about what has happened. If that fails, Jesus goes a step further to say, involve the church if that fails. So in other words, he's saying, take actions, take step to get to the root of the problem and to deal with whatever it is that is standing between you. And then he says, if that brother still refuses to see his or her fault, then treat that person as a pagan. Now, these would be shocking words coming from Jesus in those day and age, because if anything, Jesus was the one who associated with pagans. Jesus was the one who ate with tax collectors and sinners. So when Jesus said, if this brother is overtaken in a fault and failed to see his way, treat them as a pagan, what he's saying that if someone fails to show remorse or fails to see the wrong that they're doing, it is unhealthy to just sweep that away and to have a relationship with them. How were pagans treated in those days? People would not associate with pagans because they felt that if they did so, they would contract their sin. They saw sin as having this contagious quality. So Jesus is saying, not that I agree with that behavior because I don't practice that kind of a segregation, but if a brother is overtaken in a fault and refuses to show remorse, then you should treat them that way. And I think this is very strong teachings coming from Jesus. Mm-hmm. Now, what is interesting is that, as I said, that these two teachings, to forgive 70 times 7 and to treat your brother as a pagan if they fail to repent, is not contradictory, because you can forgive someone while at the same time saying, I refuse to have you minimize this action as being just a simple thing because it hurts me so much. I refuse to have you try to justify your action. And it's not against my Christian beliefs to try to get you to see that you have done me a grievous harm. So what I see sometimes in some of these situations where people have been hurt by others and they have just walked back into relationship with these people is that the people who have done the wrong is showing no kind of remorse, is showing no regret. It's just convenient for them to come back. Mm-hmm. Maybe the other relationship didn't work out, and they're just coming back home.
Till they find the next one.
This is what usually happens.
Mm-hmm. And as you said, it's really great that we can look to the Bible and the words of Jesus to get a really solid stepwise approach on how we can address this that respects the person who's doing it, but also respects yourself as the person giving the forgiveness. And Absolutely. It's so practical if people can kind of latch onto these and apply them to their situations, because you're worth it to be treated well. And at the same time, as you said, you can forgive the person, but not condone their actions and how it's affecting you.
Absolutely.
So what are some factors that make it really hard for some people to rebound from betrayal? Because there are those people, as you said, that are vindictive and bitter, and it is intensely seated and it's going nowhere.
Yes.
What makes people prone to getting in those types of situations?
Well, there are a number of things. I think one of the first thing is if you're in a situation, for example, you're in a relationship or you're in a job and you feel this job is it. I have no qualifications. There's nothing else I can do. Or, I'm in this relationship and it's my last chance for a husband and my husband has just forsaken me. Then if you feel that there is no future prospect, then people feel that the way people react to those kind of betrayal is usually a lot more intense than how others would react. Like if you just got unfairly dismissed from a job and you feel, you know what, I'm well qualified. If I send a resume out, I'm likely to get a lot of offers.
It'll work out for the best.
It will work out for the best. Absolutely. You're less likely to have this intense feeling of bitterness and hurt. People who sometimes are treated unfairly at a stage in their life where they're kicked out of a job at 55 and they're feeling, who is going to hire me at 55? How am I going to get another job at this stage of my life? Those people are most likely to hold on to the situation with a lot more bitterness. I think too, when there are other recent losses, like if you have just had a death in your family, for example, and you have also now just been dumped by your boyfriend or been betrayed by your husband, the pain from that is likely to be a lot more intense because it also serves as a trigger for the other loss that you have experienced.
Mm. And are there other factors we talked a little bit. I think of sometimes people who have their identity so tied up in things as well. Sometimes if you're the married person and you're so associated with being married.
Right. Or I'm the wife of the doctor.
Exactly. And then
Right.
that's changed. That could maybe make you more at risk.
Absolutely. So when people have this identity in the relationship or identity with the job, I am the fireman and, I'm the man in uniform, and you're let go from a situation like that, a lot of time the hurt and the pain because of the identity associated with it is a lot more intense. If you have just joined us, you're listening to the Life Transformation Radio Show, and I'm your host, Michael Hart of Elim Counselling Services, and with me in studio today is Melissa Waggett. Elim is spelled E-L-I-M, counseling with 2 L's, and you can also find out more about us by calling us at 613-699-1677. And today we're discussing overcoming betrayal. If you have some ideas that you'd like to share about this topic, or if you have a question, please interact with us by sending us an email or by communicating with us via our Facebook page or on our blog on our website. We'll be happy to hear from you. You can also tweet us on our Twitter page. You can find the links for all of these on our website at elimcounselingministry.com.
So one outcome that happens when someone gets betrayed is that trust is broken. And we've talked about this in some of the examples of how people are betrayed. What steps can someone take to rebuild the trust after they've been betrayed in a relationship?
Right. I think one of the first things that has to be there before trust can even start to be rebuilt is that as the person who has been hurt, what you want to look for is to see if there is any kind of, if there is remorse by the person who have hurt you. If someone is walking back into your life and is behaving as if you owe them a favor or you shouldn't be angry, then that's a sign that the trust is not going to be able to rebuild and that you're going to be hurt over again. So I would say a prerequisite before you even begin to talk about rebuilding trust is that there needs to be this remorse by the person who has done the wrong. I think too, the perpetrator needs to, for trust to be rebuilt, the perpetrator needs to give the other party time to heal. I've seen parties who have come before me where the perpetrator who have done the wrong is saying, it has been 4 months.
Just get over it.
Why are you so angry? Get this behind you now. It's time that you move on. So there is this expectation sometimes that the person should not be still hurting. But a lot of times they are not understanding how intensely painful their actions were or how deeply they have hurt their partner. And so in their minds, 4 months, it's time for you to move on. So the perpetrator also needs to give the hurting person permission to express pain. That's another thing that I constantly hear is that she talks about this all the time. We were at a lovely dinner where we went out and we were just about to have this fantastic meal at a restaurant, and she brought up the time that I cheated on her. Well, the reason it is happening is because it is hurting, and maybe being at a restaurant is triggering thoughts that maybe you were at this restaurant with that other person. And so it's normal for people who have been hurt to express their pain. So for trust to be rebuilt, you need to give this person time, permission to express pain. Because if someone begins to express pain and you were to let them feel that you shouldn't be feeling this way, and guess what happens? This person's going to feel you don't really understand what you have done. You don't understand how you have hurt me, and the tendency is going to be to bring this up over and over and over and over again. So if trust is broken, that there needs to be a realization that trust could take years to rebuild. It only take a moment to destroy trust, but it take years for it to be rebuilt.
And so if you are someone who's unfortunately experienced betrayal in your life, what can they do to cope with the pain of being betrayed, especially if a relationship comes to an end?
Well, I think one of the first thing that is essential to begin to recover from what has been done to you is to forgive. And I talk about the two principles in Matthew 18, where Jesus talks about forgiving 70 times 7, but he also talks about, taking your brother to task for what they have done and making them accountable to others and trying to get justice and so forth. So there's not a contradiction between forgiveness and feeling pain. There are sometimes this misunderstanding in Christian circles where someone is feeling, I haven't forgiven yet because I'm still feeling angry, or I haven't forgiven yet because it still hurts. What I want you to get is that you can forgive and still be in a lot of pain. You can forgive and still feel anger towards the person. So there needs to be this realization that continuing to feel hurt and anger does not mean you haven't forgiven. Forgiving is an exercise of the will in the face of emotions that seek to pull us to act in bitterness and revenge. So each time that you have this feeling, I need to take revenge against this person, and you say no because I have committed to godly principles of forgiving, it's an exercise of the will, and it shows that you have forgiven. Now, if you go out and you engage in these actions of bitterness and slander and so forth, then it means that maybe you haven't really forgiven because you're still indulging in these kind of activities.
Yeah, I also think letting go of blaming yourself too.
Right.
That it's not all your fault.
Absolutely.
And recognizing that other people made choices as well.
Absolutely.
And I think you talked about it as well, sort of finding that root cause in different things and being reflective that way can be helpful.
Absolutely, because the person, whatever it is, the person who did it made a decision to do whatever they did. And sometimes, unfortunately, we see the person who has been hurt, on top of the hurt, they're feeling guilty. Maybe if I were a better wife, he wouldn't have done that. Maybe if I were a better mom or a better dad, my kids would not be doing drugs and would not be incarcerated. Now, there's maybe ways you can improve, but that person still made the decision to do whatever they did. So let go of guilt and self-blame. And I think one very powerful thing that you can do is to cultivate relationship that nurtures and help you to heal from the pain. So if you have been hurt or your relationship has been broken, then I'm not saying get into another romantic relationship, because that can be destructive if it's a romantic relationship that has been broken. But there are people who you may trust, who has your well-being at heart, and you should be communicating with those persons, interacting with those persons. One of the sad mistakes that people make when they're going through these kind of emotional upheaval of betrayal is to isolate themselves. And I think that depression and suicidal thoughts grow when you're isolated. I think it's also, I see my producer telling me that I just have a minute left. So one of the other things that you can do is, as a believer, is to make sure that you attend services. Make sure that you attend a community of believers. If you have been betrayed at one church, don't stop attending church. Find somewhere else that you can go. But whatever it is, don't isolate yourself. Don't forsake assembling yourself with believers. And finally, seek professional help, because sometimes professional help is needed to help you to heal. And we have come to the end of today's show. I want to thank you for listening to this edition of the Life Transformation Show. And thank you very much, Melissa, for those wonderful questions that you have asked as usual. Until next time, I'm your host, Michael Hart of Elim Counseling Services, praying that God would bless you in all your relationships and to keep you sound in mind and pure in heart.